Good morning, America. Thank you for watching here on the Smart Money Culture here at Taxes Made Easy. We've got an interesting topic today, and I've touched on it. What are the different tax plans being featured or pushed by President Biden and former President Trump? Um, Also, we've got a lot happening locally, so a lot of changes to property taxes and proposed changes to sales taxes. So some are getting passed, some aren't, and there's the reactions to those plans. So these are all happening to Americans and right now and in the short future. So be informed. And again, a lot of news to get through on this Friday, and we will be back right after this quick break. Welcome back, everybody. Got an interesting show, a lot of information to cover today. So we're just going to dive right into it. First article is, and I'm going to go ahead and share this so you can see what I'm looking at. This is from the Washington Examiner. And if you know a realtor, go hug them, go buy them lunch, do something to help them out, because most realtors that I've talked to are struggling like crazy. I've talked to quite a few that haven't made a sale in 24 yet, and we're already well into the year. Again, home sales are continuing to drop. So the title of this, existing home sales fall most in over a year. So again, down 4.3%. And again, this is why distortions on the market are not healthy, and they hurt entire industries. They hurt people working in those industries. So the federal rate has not changed, but due to inflation, mortgage rates are still going up. So it's not just based on the Fed rate. The Fed rate helps guide it, but the people pricing mortgages are also looking at what's happening in the economy, and they're paying very close attention to what's happening with inflation. So if you really want to know what's going on, don't just pay attention to what the government's telling you. Look at what the professionals are doing. It was very, very telling to me, and this was 6 months ago. We sat down and we're looking to invest some money for one of my sons that had some money, and he was going on a mission, and we were planning to invest it while he was gone for a couple of years. And the longer we went on a CD, the lower the return was. And I just asked, is this because you don't think the economy is going in the right direction? She said, well, it's an indication we're not sure where it's going and we're being cautious. So the professionals will always be a little more cautious. So rate of home sales were down 3.7 from the year before. Again, when COVID ended, the prices weren't that high. Relatively, interest rates were dirt cheap, because there was all this money being injected into the economy, so people bought out homes like crazy, which drove the price through the roof. And again, not only people buying home due to cheap money, but you have a lot of people coming into the home, so a lot of net immigration, which again, when there's no more demand for housing, it drives the price up across the market, and then you have people fleeing California, which is losing population. Which is definitely not the historical trend that California is losing population. That has changed in the last 5 to 10 years. And again, it's affecting all the states around them. So one of the things they're looking at, the home sales are stuck because interest rates have not made any major moves. They were expecting 3 cuts to the federal inflation rate. That hasn't happened. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. And so people are becoming a lot more bearish when expecting 0 cuts from the Fed. And if things continue and inflation continues to rise, they actually might have to increase rates, which they really don't want to do. They're trying not to do it. It's the last thing the Biden administration wants, because it affects people. Now, jumping to the next article. This one, this one's more political, but I think it has some great information. This is from America Out Loud News. I'm not familiar with this site. This is definitely a right-leaning site. And you know what? I'm going to go and share it. But it's got some really good information that I wasn't aware of. And that's, again, there's articles on both sides of the aisle that I think might be a little bit too political or partisan. Partisan is a better word. So this one, it's fairly partisan, but it has some really good information in this. So again, we're working harder than ever. The deficit's at 35 trillion. Revenue dipped in 2023, went down by 500 million to 4.44 trillion. So, and then we spent around 6 trillion. So it's about a 1.5 trillion. And I think we're spending more than that. We're running up. These are conservative numbers. Right now, I think it's every 90 days. And, a couple months ago, I said every 100 days we were adding another trillion to the debt. And that's from all sources. So this is just looking at the budgetary source, but if you add inflation to it, our debt is going up very quickly. So it's estimated at least every 100 days we add another trillion to the debt. So there's 365 days in a year. That's at least 3 trillion being added annually from all sources to the debt, not just you'd think the budget includes all of it, but again, we're getting these crazy numbers coming in. Again, the result, when we are spending like crazy and overspending, crushing inflation. That's exactly what we're seeing. So then it shifts to some of the effects. And again, they don't hold any punches against Joe Biden or President Biden. But one thing they talk about is this latest missile and drone attack on Israel. And they do point out, and this is, I think, good. People are saying, look, they shouldn't have released first $6 billion and then $10 billion to Iran. And they're pointing out, hey, that's a drop in the bucket. That's not the real issue here. And probably wasn't what allowed Iran to do this, but what allowed Iran and has allowed Iran to really flourish was the lifting of sanctions. So last year in office, their oil exports accounted for $7.9 billion. Now, to be fair, Iran, Russia, other countries have figured out ways around it, mainly thank you to China. Communist China is not our friend. They are absolutely not our friend. And the fact that they have favored nation status is an insult to democracy. But they're saying in Biden's first year, it grew to $25.5 billion, then to $42.6 billion, and then 23 hit a record of $60 billion in oil revenues. So they're saying this is really where Iran's money is coming from to support and fund terrorism. Because the prices of oil are high, they've been kept high. Why? Because mainly we've limited supply. We tried to sanction Russia's oil, and it worked at first for a little bit, but then Iran and Russia, they just started selling oil like crazy to China of all places. So they purchased 80% of Iran's exports. They filled their petroleum reserves, and what do? We sold and depleted our reserves. So to be fair, Biden recently did try to reach out and consider purchasing oil to try to refill our reserves. But this is where partisan politics really gets stupid. When Trump tried to do it and gas was much cheaper, they refused to do it. And then under Biden, they sold the cheap oil that was in there that had been purchased years before at cheaper prices. And now that gas is through the roof. This is what happens when you artificially restrict oil across the economy. Foreign companies are profiting. Some of the worst actors in the world are making billions and billions of dollars while it's hurting our economy. And and the dependence on foreign oil is something you're not going to get away from unless we're truly dependent no independent, and can provide for our own resources. So again, that's one of the worst things, biggest things that hurt Venezuela, Iran, Russia, is when America was producing oil and we had cheap oil, and they weren't making all the money that they are now because oil is expensive and supply is down because the United States is artificially restricting our production. So next article, again, this just continues on with the story about the bridge in Baltimore, which collapsed. And again, the cost of that, economic cost of the area is estimated at 191 million a day in lost economic activities, people not working. There's about 20,000 direct jobs connected to the port and about 100,000 indirect jobs that are all impacted because ships can't come in and out of the port because the bridge is down. Again, that's a huge impact on the local economy, local area. And so I really do hope they move as quickly as possible to fix that, repair that. That's going to really hurt the local economy there in Maryland, but also what affects part of America affects all of us. We're all in the same boat together. Here's an interesting little change of pace. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. So this is an interesting thing. I've seen this before. The IRS is seeking membership nominations for the 2025 Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council. I would love to sit on this council and give them a piece of my mind. Problem is, I don't have the time. And so there's requirements to sit on the council. But if you're interested, you're retired, and you don't like the direction of the IRS, especially if you have any kind of tax background, this could be huge. So you propose enhancements to IRS operations, recommend administrative and policy changes to improve taxpayer services, fairness, and compliance. And to be fair, a lot of what the IRS is doing, they have an important job. The way our government's set up, they have an important function. The IRS, and under a voluntary system, if they didn't have any kind of compliance enforcement, then we would be even broker than we are. Maybe Congress would actually be forced to get their financial house in order. So if you're interested or you know anybody, this is something to be aware of. There are ways to give input and to the IRS, not only through your congressmen and senators, but also if you have the time to consider applying for. And so again, if you have experience with this, it's a good article, a good way to contribute back and be involved and have your voice heard as far up as the IRS. Now we're coming up on another break, and we're going to try to wrap up the news, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back, everybody. You just got distracted a little bit here. So the next article I'm sharing, this is also from the IRS. Again, this is more information that they're releasing about this last tax year. Claiming they collected about 4.7 for fiscal year 2023. Again, they processed. They just kind of go through the numbers from the 23 fiscal year, and then they talk about how they increase service, etc. And a lot of it is, hey, this IRA funding, Inflation Reduction Act, has really helped out the IRS. It's helped them expand things, but as far as some of the stuff in here is just plain baloney. Their service has gotten worse, not better. As far as phone services, again, most of the day you still get a message saying you can't get through, you can't get through, you can't get through. But again, I was calling between 5 and 7 last night and getting through in 5 to 7 minutes. So again, that if you're trying to get through to the IRS, call later. Again, the IRS has claimed there's no increase in audits and returns for people making under $400,000 per year. This is not true. So a lot of this is why you can't trust everything that comes out. They've come out and openly admitted they have no way to actually measure this, and they have absolutely targeted self-employed individuals, 1099s, with gusto. So again, while they claim that someone's making over 100,000 just looking at their gross amount, that's not true at all. And from what I've seen, and what even public statements that have come out by someone speaking off the cuff, etc. So again, take it with a grain of salt when they go rah rah. Let's promote the IRS and what we're doing. And interesting story here. This one's actually from Bloomberg, and not a lot of information here that I'm going to share. But the title of the article is New York's rich get creative to flee state taxes. Auditors are onto them. So New York state taxes keep going up. And what do the rich do? They figured out that if they live in Florida and then just fly in when they need to, they can claim residency in Florida where there's no state taxes and still work in New York. Now, of course, if they're Florida residents, New York can't tax them. But the question on residency is that you have to be present in the state more than 180 days or half the year. And so auditors are getting very detailed and going after them to have them pay in full, or they're gonna audit them and make sure, have them prove up which days they were in New York, which ones they were in Florida. And with the advent of Zoom and working remotely, it's easier than ever to live outside of the state most of the year and then just go to New York when you need to. And so if you don't think the rich are talking to their CPAs and tax attorneys and making sure, okay, these are how many days I can go to New York and still maintain my residency in Florida, they're absolutely doing that. And those that get nipped are going to plan better. But again, this is very, very common. It's very easy to just jump on a jet and fly up to New York from Florida, conduct what business you need to, and then leave. So it also mentions how they want them to log their days, show where they are. And again, they will also look at where their pets are, where their family's located, and auditors are going to be scrutinizing this very carefully to see and argue that they are still New York residents and subject to New York taxation. But again, when you really target the rich, they just make adjustments. They can move to a different state. They can go somewhere else. And financially, it makes a lot of sense if they have the flexibility to do that. So some of the... just want to touch on some articles here fairly quickly. Just talking about property tax rhetoric in Vermont. So you have Governor Scott here, and this gets into a very interesting question. And again, when you get into local budgets, school budgets drive property taxes. And property owners can be very, very sensitive to this and vocal about this. So it's talking about how local communities are rejecting their school budgets, saying you're spending too much, you're spending too much, you're spending too much. And so school spending is up across the board this year. There's inflation, deferred maintenance, healthcare, support for students, and a lot of the cash that was thrown out by the pandemic to schools, etc., is ending. So local communities are having to bear the burden of all the spending themselves. So one little line here, it says the $2 billion statewide education fund eclipses the rest of the state government for the first time ever. So you're getting a lot of local fights, and this is something that you should be paying attention to. What's happening in your state? How do you address this? There's a lot of, the governor has vetoed what has been cobbled together in a bipartisan manner, because he says it doesn't go enough. We have to really address these property taxes, or we're going to be driving people out of their homes. And Vermont is not a cheap state anyway. So going with that, Lincoln, Nebraska, same thing. And this is blue states, red states are facing these same issues where, because of the increase in property values, property taxes are also shooting up, and people that have been in their homes are being forced out due to property taxes. It seems very fair. You go and you purchase a property, you think, okay, I can make this mortgage, I can plan for this, plan long term for this, and then the rates, everything becomes more and more expensive. That becomes a difficult thing to swallow. So in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I've mentioned this before, they're going back and forth, and their latest agreement, Governor Pillen, he said he'll call as many special sessions as it takes. I'll keep him working all summer long to get some relief in there, because it is hurting people, and property taxes are going up and up. It affects a lot of people. Now in Georgia, again, red states, blue states, they're all going through this. Governor Kemp was able to sign some bills to reduce taxes for about $500 million on businesses and individuals. So again, revenue's going down. They have some issues where this doesn't look like it's. They're banking on this creating long-term growth by cutting taxes for businesses and individuals, and they're cutting the state rate to be competitive with other states. And it's going to cost money. While your property taxes are still going up, but they're trying to do something and provide some relief, and they're trying to figure out how to. We also signed a bill which limits how much property taxes can go up each year, because again, the same problem, property taxes, is affecting others. One reason Georgia is able to do this, and this is buried in the article, is that they have saved money and put money away through the pandemic, through all of this, so that they have assets. And I just want to share a couple articles real quick. These are more charts. And the question was school spending. And this is a very common issue, and I'm going to try to address it. This is from USA Facts, and it just talks just very straightforward about where are they spending the most money. California, Colorado, Illinois, the Northeast spend the most money. Do they get the most bang for their buck? That is the question. Is it worth it? And there have been many studies showing that just because you spend more money on education doesn't mean you get corresponding results. So this talks about overall school rankings, and again, you have this on the handy little chart to the side. New Jersey coming to have some of the best schools. New York, but this is where you get a lot of spending apparently, but not all of these states are spending. So if you switch over and look at the other chart, throughout the Northwest, you have a lot more spending, and apparently it looks like better results. But when you get away from that, Illinois has a decent ranking, but I think when you go to Chicago schools, when you go to a lot of these inner city areas, this is where it really struggles. California is one of the biggest spenders, and they have fairly poor results. So California is in the 40 percentile, or is down in the 40s when it comes to, number 40 when it comes to actual school results. Arizona is rated really low, and I think that's a lot of that is driven by some of the local issues that you see here, where your spending is very, very low, unfortunately, on Indian reservations. And there's a lot of them, so that actually has a big impact. So Hawaii, still middling, even though they spend very high. So there's this misconception that the more you spend, the better your schools are going to be. Not necessarily so. So again, be careful of that trap. It's all about how the funds are being spent, and do we really should school spending be going up every single year? There's always programs, there's additional things schools want to do, and I think it's great when they make some of these programs available to students. But when you're driving people out of their homes and make it unaffordable for people to even pay their mortgages, one of the big problems is when you have school spending going up and up, it's local, is that you create more of an elite area where you have the better schools, more funds, and then the poor areas where they can't afford to raise rates, that's where you see inner city schools, poorer areas really suffer. And where I'm in Arizona, we see that. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. I live in the suburbs. We have really good schools. But again, there's a lot, every year it's a fight over property taxes going up. And the people really, really do not want property taxes to go up. They're very adamant about that. But you go to the poorer areas, you have a huge school district here. Many would argue inefficient. But again, they're dealing with the poorer areas of Tucson, and they struggle. And I've volunteered to some of these schools, and it's really tough to see what happens. So I want to spend the bulk of my time on one last article from Reuters. And I think this is where I mentioned an article the other day because I think this is important. When you're voting, when you're considering who to support for president, it is important to note the differences. And I think too often today, it becomes a personal slugfest, mudslinging contest to see who can bruise up or dirty up the other opponent as much as possible. So I think the article I cited the other day was definitely biased, left-leaning, and again, I share articles from both sides of the aisle, and it didn't have as much information as I wanted. And this Reuters article really does. It has a lot more. So this is talking about where is Trump considering going, and the differences between where Trump is going and considering versus Biden, President Biden. And again, there's no easy fix here. We've got a huge national debt that's exploding. If someone just cuts spending like crazy to try to rein that in, they're going to be the most unpopular president ever in the history of man. But it's exactly what we should do. So just some of the ideas, they want to do a new middle-class tax cut is what they're talking about, and these are advisors. This is what's being proposed, mainly from conservative think tanks. Another one, and this has already been floated, is a cut to the federal payroll tax. Now, the federal payroll tax is very regressive, and that it hurts the poorest the most because they get taxed at the same rate. Now, as far as this payroll tax goes, um, these funds go directly to Social Security and Medicare. But who's paying the burden of this? Who's disproportionately paying the burden of this? Again, it's a very regressive tax, and you could say the poorest. And who benefits the least from it, or if they get stuck in on living on just Social Security, it's the poorest. So it's, do you try to fix Social Security? George Bush tried to do it. That was the last real attempt, and he got dragged through the mud for it. So both parties have just kicked the can down the road and not been serious about it. So again, Social Security, Medicare, there's no funds. Like Georgia, they had extra funds set aside so they can make tax cuts and hope that it increases their economy. We don't have any safety net here. We're already spending way over what we should be spending, and it's going to create more and more problems, more and more inflation for the country. So the slashing the payroll tax was already proposed in 2020, but part of the issue here, the argument is that so much money has already been thrown at the economy that it doesn't, throwing more money at the economy can be seen mostly as another factor adding to inflation. So what the economy needs is not more money in it. We need more spending power to the middle class and to cut costs to the middle class. But I think really what we need is we need cheaper energy. We need more affordable housing. We need all these rates because you can give us more and more money. And if it just drives further inflation, what's the point? We're running in circles. They're talking about increasing the so-called standard deduction. But one of the big things here is keeping the Trump tax is in place. So again, this gets down to some of the risks. When the economy is running hot, especially with inflation, you don't need further stimulus. It just makes the problem worse. This is the big key difference. So he's indicating plans to make the Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent. So, and these are the rates that we currently have. President Biden, and this is the clearest difference between the two. He wants to extend certain elements of it, but not make them permanent, and then let the rest expire. So the article the other day was very brief, skimpy on facts, didn't really go into it. And we're running out of time again. So we're going to have to continue this conversation after the break. And this is where I want to spend the rest of the time, is talking about how these will affect average taxpayers and help you as individuals. So we've just got a few seconds left before the next break. So by letting a lot of these expire, he's not passing or doing anything to increase taxes, but when they go away, it will increase taxes. And then increase taxes like a 25% levy on people with over 100 million in assets. So I don't know if that's even constitutional, and we'll talk about that when we come back. Welcome back, everybody. We're having fun with this Reuters article talking about the differences in tax proposals and ideas floating between President Biden and President Trump. Again, President Trump is looking to cut taxes. Again, they're claiming for the middle class. And again, the typical accusation is, look, tax cuts have disproportionately helped the rich. I mean, if you do anything based on a percentage dollar amount, the rich will save more money, but they're also the ones paying the most in taxes. But if you do a percentage, it helps everybody. So if someone, again, it's hard to argue. It's always easy to argue that tax cuts disproportionately help the rich. But again, it's telling that Biden doesn't want to end the TCJSA, at least in part, because then it'll be shown as him raising taxes on the middle class. So again, you have to step away from partisan things to just kind of step back and understand what's really going on. So again, tax cuts. President Trump, they're saying he's going to advocate for more tax cuts, which is what he did the first time. Will that actually bring down inflation? Or will it contribute to more inflation? And that's the truth, is when you have, and I said this the other day, if you have the same amount of productivity with more dollars chasing the same productivity, it's not going to bring down inflation. It's going to increase it. What we need to do, and this is really where it comes, is reinvigorate America's energy industry. So you produce more energy, largely fossil fuels. You make it cheaper for businesses to produce goods. That's going to bring down inflation. So not the tax cuts, it will help Americans, but you have to lower costs or make things more affordable. What they're really talking about is bringing down the rate of inflation. You almost never lose inflation. The cost of things almost never goes down over time unless you make some serious changes. So right now, in Arizona, where I am, gas is between $4 to $5 a gallon. That goes back down to around $2 a gallon. That's a huge decrease, and that will really affect and help people have profits. Your prices will probably never go down to where they were, because there's plenty of other costs and people are will be recovering from this huge increase in inflation. But what you really need to do is encourage production and to really lower the cost of living. So it's not so much the tax cuts that are going to help. It will help people keep more money in their pocket, but really what we need is not more available money. We need more available goods and services to provide more supply. And that's what's really going to bring down prices and make things more affordable again. So they're half right here. Everybody likes to hear tax cuts, etc., but just throwing more money and making more money available isn't always the solution. Now, so here's a nice little, in Biden's plan, you have, again, this goes more into what he's proposing in particular, but what I really want to focus on is the how it's going to affect you and the details of how it's going to affect you. So one of the big things here that we're looking at, plans to keep most of the middle class tax cuts here and extend it, but not make them permanent. Which means towards it, when he's out of office or when he's almost gone, it would be easier to just let them extend rather than making them permanent. And that's all part of the games that both parties make, is that they set it out and say that Republicans, they both do it where they do something and then they have it expire in so many years before, because it's easy to get it passed. If it turns out to be bad policy, it's easier to just let it expire and go away. But for tax cuts, they kind of leave this political football out there for the next Congress or two to deal with. And so, unfortunately, these tax cuts aren't permanent. And they'll just go away on their own unless someone makes them permanent. And that would constitute an increase on taxes, more money flowing to the government, which I think is the last thing we need. Again, we can't raise taxes enough to cover the spending. And the more we raise, the higher spending goes. So really what we need is real fiscal sanity, and we need to cut spending more than anything else. But that's painful, so people don't talk about it. I want to go into this 25% minimum levy on individuals with wealth over 100 million. See, this sounds good because it's just targeting the rich, right? We shared that other article of people flying from Florida, New York, and tracking their days. You know, they're going to be auditing them. They make sure, hey, you weren't here in New York too many days, and where's your pet? You know, where's your real locus or residency? You know, where are you truly living? And you know, the rich have the CPAs, they have the attorneys to give them advice and to keep those logs, have that proof, and show where they're truly living. So the 25% minimum levy on individuals is what I really want to talk about to wrap up. And here's a very long, very boring article that you probably don't want to read because it's all about a court case. And this is back from July of 23. And this is talking about a proposed wealth tax on billionaires. This isn't new. Senator Warren proposed it in the 2020 primaries. It got shut down, but President Biden has been talking about this for quite some time. So, and it's not an income tax. It is an ability tax, it is an income tax. It's based on wealth. So if you're targeting people's wealth out there, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go overseas again. When President Trump passed his tax sets and provided exemptions for people to bring money back from foreign sources to the United States, that brought a lot of money into the government. Because people were coming back from overseas, so okay, taxes are going to be sane again, or compared to other countries. And they came back to the United States. A lot of wealthier individuals do. They brought their money with them, which was invested into the economy, and that's part of why things boomed when he first took office. A big part of it. If you just target straight out wealth, what do you think the rich are going to do? If they can purchase homes and have private jets and just fly up to New York when they can, and it will save them a lot of money to have zero income tax in Florida versus a very high income tax rate in California, New York, not including state taxes, but city taxes as well. They're going to do it. So even though you can claim, hey, we're going to get so much money from this, and again, the question here is, these are unrealized gains. So this means that if your assets rise in value during a year, you will pay taxes on that increase even if you realize no actual gains through a sale. If you lack the cash, you don't have the cash assets to pay this, you might have to sell the assets to pay the tax bill or pay later with interest. So if your stocks go up 20%, but you want to hold on to them, you might not be able to. Now you have to pay the taxes on that before you even sell anything. So the government is grabbing their share of what they think will be future gains. But here's the kicker. If your assets fall in value, you will not be able to deduct the full loss from your overall income. So heads, if your assets go up, the government wins and taxes you. If it goes down, you don't get to deduct the full amount. So a lot of people, on the source that this is from the Wall Street Journal where they're getting this, they question whether or not it is actually legal constitutionally to do something like this, to tax money people haven't actually received. So you have a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals recently ruled against this. That's expected to go to the Supreme Court. It hasn't yet. Again, they're citing Wall Street Journal. Ninth Circuit upholds a wealth tax. And it's a Ninth Circuit. It's the most overturned circuit in the country. What the Supreme Court will do, we're not sure. But again, this really gets into the 16th Amendment, that authorized taxing of interest. And I don't want to get into the constitutionality of the case and whether or not they can pass a wealth tax. I'm concerned about the ramifications if they do. And even the threat of doing this is going to be a huge problem, because what are the rich going to do? If you have more than 100 million in assets and they want to tax 20% of your gains, whether or not you actually get it every single year, what are you going to do with your assets? You're not staying in the country. I wouldn't. Why would you? Patriotism only goes so far when your country is trying to rake you over the coals. The richest 1% pay, 30 to 40%. It might even be higher. I'm just throwing numbers out there. They pay the vast majority of the taxes paid in our country. And it gets to the point where people will say, look, this doesn't make sense. I can go elsewhere. And they'll take those assets overseas. And while they're citizens, they have to report it. But again, part of the problem is that people have renounced their citizenship. This is what happens when you target the ultra wealthy and you try to make them the scapegoats. They leave. They go somewhere else. They conduct business through other partners that aren't members. They have a myriad ways of avoiding these kinds of taxes. And so that's the scary thing to me, is that when people come out, this court said that Elon Musk got too big of a package. He got too much income from his company that he created, Tesla. That ruling, it's unprecedented. It's a very new ruling, but it has a very chilling effect for business owners, especially very large business owners. They stop, hold the phone. The government's going to come and tell me what I can earn from my own company. And I rightly or wrongly decided the impact, the causation, the effect it will have on the economy is what's usually not considered. So when you have a lot of wealth fleeing the country, it doesn't matter how many more taxes you think you're going to get. It's going to shrink your tax base. It's going to shrink the investment in the country as funds are pulled out and moved elsewhere. It's going to hurt the economy in very serious ways. So again, trying to always figure out how is another way we can tax the public, I think is very counterproductive. And that's my biggest concern, is that they will try to pass some kind of wealth tax nationally, especially if you have the Ninth Circuit of Court providing cover for it. It's going to take time. If the Supreme Court rule, finds it unconstitutional, it'll take time for any court case to get through there. The article did say that they plan to appeal. I'm not seeing any update on that. So again, when you're voting, when you're considering tax plans, and I'm not saying one is right or the other, but if you really want to help the poor and the middle class in our country, we need more productivity. We need to lower prices overall. And unfortunately, too often, we're seeing the poor suffer the most. There was an interesting article the other day from Los Angeles where the mayor, they put 23,000 homeless people in shelters. They've sheltered them in different locations, which is amazing. That's great. But at what cost? They still have an estimated 50,000. I think the real number is probably much higher than that, of homeless. So the more they've sheltered, the more people flock to that area. and it just creates a bigger problem. And the real issue is mental health, drug use, and the availability, that people can just take over areas and nobody does anything about it. And it creates a huge ecological disaster and problem that nobody's considering. And the more, so they've actually gone to the rich and said, hey, you guys have money. Can't you purchase homes and just let the poor live there for free? There's been plenty of things to do that. But again, then there's people that have tried to do, provide cheap housing, and that got shut down and torn down by the county and city. So enjoy the weekend. I'm sure most people don't want to think about taxes, but there's a lot to consider as we're planning for the future and trying to make wise decisions, not only for your own personal budgets, but considering what's best for the country and also your local politics. Get involved, understand what's happening with your property taxes, because these issues aren't just faced in a few states. Again, I've cited articles from 6 or 7 states at least. But I hope you have a great weekend and don't think about taxes until Monday. So again, Hubert Johnson here with Taxes Made Easy. Thank you for watching live or on rebroadcast, and we'll see you next week.